Hello, Lynn. Hello, Michael.
Good evening.
Good evening. I can see you all. You're all good. If I can have the commissioners all on screen. It's 6:29, so we have like a minute left, but we're good to go when it hits 6:30, Chair. We're live on social media and all is good.
And we have all the peoples?
And we have a quorum. Everyone's here with us.
Excellent. So we'll go TikTok and wait for our minute.
While we're waiting, you can hear me, David?
I can, Michael. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And it looks like the hour is upon us. David, are we live on all of the channels here and there and all around the world?
Yes, we are. We are confirmed, Chair.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. And welcome to the 30th Zoom, I don't know which one this is, of the Planning Commission. Before we get started, it is Thursday, July 1. It is 6:30 p.m. And I would like to start with our lovely script explaining how this is going to work. In compliance with California Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order to protect public health and prevent the spread of COVID-19, this Planning Commission meeting is being conducted via teleconference on the city's website and is also provided on a wide array of streaming media platforms to offer access to the public to the fullest extent possible. WehoTV staff have confirmed that this Planning Commission meeting is currently streaming successfully on Spectrum Channel 10 and online at weho.org/WehoTV. In addition, and as a courtesy, this meeting is also successfully streaming on the city's YouTube channel at youtube.com/WehoTV and on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, and Android TV. WehoTV staff monitor this broadcast on all platforms throughout the meeting and will notify the Planning Commission Secretary should broadcast disruptions arise. Please do not interrupt the live meeting by calling or texting the Planning Commissioners about difficulties viewing the meeting. And I have about difficulties speaking. If you are experiencing viewing difficulties while watching this live stream, please reload the page or visit weho.org/WehoTV to access our official live stream and to view a list of other available streaming options. In addition, you may call in to listen to this meeting by dialing 669-900-6833. The meeting ID is 923-9147-6246, and then press the pound sign. Please understand that internet speeds, device reliability, third-party platform reliability, and individual or personal technical issues are out of the scope of this broadcast. WehoTV staff has published a guide at weho.org/WehoTV to troubleshoot your connection. If you're having difficulties connecting to the meeting, you can also call 323-848-3151. And on a personal note, I hope that's the last time I ever have to read that and we get to do in person from here on out, but I'm not optimistic. Okay, with that, sorry, my agenda was turned around. Let's move on we're officially called to order, and let's move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Secretary Gillig, would you be so kind as to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chair. Everyone, you can turn off your mutes. There you go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, David. Item 3, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, and good evening, Commissioners. Commissioner Vinson,
Here.
Commissioner Thomas,
Here.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Here.
Commissioner Odetta,
Here.
Commissioner Carvalero,
Here.
Vice Chair Jones,
Here.
Chair Hoopen Garner,
Here.
and we have a quorum.
Thank you, David. Item 4, special order of business, the election of the chair and the vice chair. Item A, the election of chair. The Planning Commission will elect a chair to the Planning Commission for a term through June 30th, 2022. Are there any nominations? Vice Chair Jones?
I would like to nominate our existing chair, Lynn Hoopengarner, to continue her term. I know this is kind of a weird timing, but that is my motion.
I second.
Thank you. Vice Chair has motioned and Commissioner Thomas has seconded. Thank you. Are there any other nominations? There being none, David, would you please call the vote?
Thank you. Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Odetta,
Yes.
Commissioner Carvalero,
Yes.
Commissioner Vinson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jones,
Yes.
Chair Hoopen Garner,
Yes.
and congratulations, Chair Hoopen Garner. Your term goes through June 30th of 2022.
Thank you, David. On to item B, the election of vice chair. The Planning Commission will elect a vice chair to the Planning Commission for a term through June 30th, 2022. And I choose to execute the chair's prerogative and nominate sitting vice chair Stacy Jones for another extraordinary term. Are there any seconds?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Carvalero. Are there any other nominations? There being none, David, would you please call the vote?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Carvalero,
Yes.
Commissioner Vinson,
Yes.
Commissioner Odetta,
Yes.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jones,
Yes.
Chair Hoopen Garner,
Yes.
and the motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Vice Chair Jones, for a term through June 30th, 2022.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And on to item 5, approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve? So moved from Vice Chair Jones,
I'll second.
second from Commissioner Carvalho. David, would you call the vote?
Thank you. Commissioner Carvalero,
Yes.
Commissioner Odetta,
Yes.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Vinson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jones,
Yes.
Chair Hoopen Garner,
Yes.
and the motion passes. The agenda is approved as presented for Thursday, July 1st, 2021.
Very good. On to item 6, more goodies, admin, approval of minutes. We have item A, the approval of the June 3rd, 2021 minutes. Do we have a motion?
A
Don't
motion to
talk over it,
approve.
guys.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Vincent. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Dutta, thank you for your second. David, would you call the vote?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Vinson,
Yes.
Commissioner Odetta.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Carvalero,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jones,
Yes.
Chair Hoopen Garner,
Yes.
and the motion carries to approve the minutes for June 3rd, 2021 unanimous as presented.
And item B, our last little piece of admin, the approval of the minutes of the June 17th, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve? Vice Chair Jones,
I'll second.
second from Commissioner Lombardi. David, please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Vincent,
Yes.
Commissioner Dutta,
Yes.
Commissioner Carvalero,
Yes.
Chair Hoopengarner,
Yes.
and the motion passes. Minutes for June 17th, 2021 are approved unanimously as presented.
Congratulations, everyone. That was so controversial. Moving on to item 7, public comment. At this time has been set aside for the public to address the Planning Commission on any item that is not set before public hearing or any item that is not on tonight's agenda. David, do we have any public?
Chair, I received no public comments for this item. If there is anybody on the line that would like to join us, please star 9 from your telephone at this time to let me know you'd like to speak. You have 3 minutes. And it looks like we're all clear, Chair.
Thank you. Then let's move on to item 8, Director's Report. Mr. Kehoe.
Good evening, everyone. John Kehoe, Director of Planning and Development Services Department. Just a quick update on the next City Council meeting, July 19th. We have 2 items that the Planning Commission had looked at before, and that's new billboards at 9157 Sunset Boulevard and at 8752 Sunset Boulevard. And because we had that snafu at a recent City Council meeting and it had to be ended early, the council has established a special meeting on Wednesday, July 21st. That's a very unusual time for the council to have it. So just making sure everyone knows, Wednesday, July 21st is going to be a special City Council meeting. And that's when we'll give the council an update on the Robertson Lane project. The only other thing I wanted to do is just to congratulate Paul Aravallo on his retirement and congratulate David Wilson on his appointment to being the new city manager. So I look forward to working with Mr. Wilson in the future. And that's it.
Thank you, Director Kehoe. Moving on to item 9, items from commissioners. Are there, Vice Chair Jones?
Yes, thank you. We received as a commission a letter from a member of the public. I believe his name is James Whalen, and I know I want to put him on blast, but he had voiced some concerns about the noise from EPLP and also from Health House. I don't believe Health House came before Planning Commission. If it did, it was either before my time or at one of the few meetings I've missed since I've been on commission. But I'm curious to know, and it's not necessary for this meeting, but can staff advise as to when the EPLP rooftop bar and restaurant was approved at our next meeting? I just would like to, for public benefit, make sure that, folks understand kind of the roles that the commission serves and, when these were approved.
Sure, we can certainly bring that update. I believe that alcohol service at EPLP was actually approved at a director's hearing and not at the Planning Commission.
Got it. Okay.
We'll bring that information to you at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, I don't ever want to create make work, but is there an easy way to find out if there have been any code compliance violations or complaints from neighbors for that restaurant?
So we would need to check with our code compliance division on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other items from commissioners? Just to clarify, I think the EPLP approval came up in conjunction with the catch discussions regarding their noise issues. And at that time, it was, discussed about the fact that both of those were done at the director level and did not come before Planning Commission. Okay. Moving on to item 10, consent calendar, there is none. Let's move on to item 11, public hearings. Item A is a zone text amendment for improvements to the billboards off Sunset Boulevard. This is a hearing to consider recommending to the City Council an amendment to allow improvements to the existing non-conforming off-site signs, billboards, outside the Sunset specific plan area along the city's commercial arterials. With that, Mr. Eck, are you on stage? Oops, audio.
I am indeed.
Okay.
So, good evening, commissioners. Brian Eck, Senior Planner with the Long Range Planning Division. The item before you is, here we go, a proposed zone text amendment to address existing billboards in the city of West Hollywood, with the exception of the Sunset Specific Plan area. And since cityhood, billboards outside of the Sunset Specific Plan area have existed in a legally non-conforming state. This means that they can remain, but are unable to be improved, lowered, or adjusted in any other way. Making a feature or a use legally non-conforming is typically done to urge its gradual reduction and obsolescence and removal of that use or feature over time. However, with billboards in the city of West Hollywood, a considerable number persist after the nearly 40 years of cityhood. And during that time, we've recognized that these regulations have some negative, albeit unintended, land use consequences. So in 2018, in recognition of these externalities, the City Council directed staff to explore options to address our non-conforming billboards outside of the Sunset Strip. Council members D'Amico and Horvath introduced this item to the City Council. Later guidance from the City Council in the matter was to allow existing sites to retain their rights to billboards, link improvements to positive land use outcomes, capture public benefits as part of the process, and to be mindful of the impact that any potential changes would have on the efforts ongoing on Sunset Boulevard, namely the value of billboards up on the Sunset Strip. So a couple of the goals, and this relate directly to the directive we were given by City Council. First, it's to relieve the negative land use outcomes that result from the legally non-conforming state. And that comes in the form of vacant buildings and underdeveloped lots that contain billboards, and then deferred building improvements, which are often not made when a property owner might fear losing their billboard rights by making those improvements. So the proposed ordinance does allow an existing property with billboards to retain those rights if they improve their buildings without fear of losing those. The second goal is to create aesthetic improvements that would come in the form of building and billboard upgrades as allowed as part of the process. It would result in the shift of distribution of billboards compared to what currently exists today, to remove and continue to encourage billboards to not exist on our collector streets, namely Melrose and Robertson. And to instead encourage them to locate at the intersection of arterial streets and in our most intensive commercial zones, the CA and CR zones. And then finally, as relates to aesthetic improvements, the proposed ordinance would seek to reduce visual clutter through as relates and results from billboards. The third goal is to capture value and generate public benefits that can come in the form of building improvements, housing projects, and increased affordability, which the ordinance proposed does include. It does incentivize historic preservation and carves out special rules for designated cultural resources, and then would create revenue sharing and other public benefits during the process. Finally, as mentioned, it would protect other billboard values on Sunset Boulevard. And we did conduct a brief study as part of evaluations that we conducted on Sunset Boulevard. And the conclusion was, so long as we continue to drive extremely high aesthetic values on Sunset Boulevard, that that the market for billboards will continue to be segmented from Sunset versus the rest of West Hollywood. What exists today outside the Sunset Strip is 67 total billboards, as shown on the map on the screen. These total 38,000 square feet of sign area. And by comparison, Sunset Boulevard has 106 billboards that currently exist and 142,000 square feet with several in the process of seeking approval. A little bit about the ordinance itself. It breaks down the project types into major and minor projects. The major projects would be the replacement or relocation of existing billboards, only in conjunction with a new development project. That includes 2/3 of its uses dedicated for housing, which ties to the state's Housing Accountability Act. The second type is a modification of an existing billboard, and that's for, I think, less intensive land use types, such as building improvements, historic property, seismic upgrades. And then finally, new billboards, extremely limited in their scope. That's related to city-owned properties, public-private joint development projects, and then development projects that include additional affordable housing units. The proposed location of where billboards would be allowed to relocate or pursue these types of projects are along our arterial streets, as defined in the city's general plan. And the asterisk here is because the one exception we'd like to make is for La Cienega, just north of Santa Monica Boulevard, which is currently designated as a collector, but does contain, if I go back to the map here, a large portion of the existing legally non-conforming billboards. And for all intents and purposes, operates like an arterial at that. Size would be limited to 1,200 square feet for a single billboard, with up to 1,800 square feet of sign area per site. The administrative procedures required to obtain approval of these types of projects would be subject to a development agreement, which is reviewed by the Planning Commission, ultimately approved by City Council, would require a visual field analysis to ensure the visual clutter aspect of our goal is achieved, and then would require certain findings that there are public benefits included, and there are certain design considerations, such as the integration of site sign and architecture. Finally, the minor projects reserved for existing billboards along arterial streets. Again, the caveat about La Cienega. This would be limited to structural improvements and 5% modifications in terms of what exists today, its angle, its size, its height, up to a certain height limit as prescribed in the ordinance. And this would be a staff level approval through an administrative permit. This means that that billboards that exist along our collector streets, namely again Melrose and Robertson, would continue to exist in a legally non-conforming state, and we would like to see their continued obsolescence and eventual removal. And just a note that they may transfer sign area as part of the relocation provisions, and they do have an increased ratio and thus an increased incentive to do so. So hopefully that would encourage those billboards to move to the intersection of arterial streets. And finally, there's a couple of changes that staff would like to recommend as part of the ordinance. We'd like to recommend an amendment to section G.1.A.I.B to just reinforce that these are intended to be located in commercial zones along our arterial streets, as the other project types are required to be. And then we'd like to strike section G.1.A.G, the additional finding sections in its entirety. And to finally move the definitions chapter to 19.9, where our great city attorney reminded me we house all of our definitions in the code typically. And that concludes my presentation. I am available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brian. Before we begin, I'd like to ask legal counsel about noticing on this particular item. Yes, it's a zone text amendment, but these are specific projects located in specific locations. And was there any noticing made specifically to residents that would be impacted by changes to the billboards within 500 feet of their residences?
So I'll defer to staff on how they actually notice this zone text amendment. There are provisions in state law that say that if something will impact, I think, more than 1,000 properties, it can be done by publication in the newspaper and not by mailing out a notice to individual parcels. So my guess is that this type of zone text amendment impacts that many properties, and that's how it was done. But I'll let staff chime in if there's any other thinking on that.
Lauren, that is correct. That is how this item was noticed.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, let's open this to questions of staff. Oh, before we get there, I just want to inform the public that first we will have the commissioners ask questions of staff, and then we will open it to public comment. And from there, we will move on to further questions and deliberations. So with that, who would like to go first? Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Did you say that the development agreement for these projects will come before Planning Commission to flesh out at a later date? Okay.
Correct. Every development agreement does require the recommendation from Planning Commission prior to going to City Council.
And the development agreement will apply to all of the billboards?
That would apply to each individual project that would come forward under the proposed ordinance.
Okay, so it won't be, okay, so it won't be like Sunset where there's just a blanket development agreement.
No, each one has their own specific development agreement for each project.
I understand that, but there are certain elements that are standard in each of those projects, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
I think a lot of the provisions that you've seen in the development agreements on Sunset would carry forward, although it would be tailored specific for the locations that are not on Sunset.
Okay,
so
great. Thank you.
I'm going to hold my questions until after we've heard from the public and we move into deliberation.
You're muted, Chair.
Sorry, my bad. Thank you. I will ask a couple of questions before we move into public comment because I'd like some clarification. In your staff report, you did not reflect any direction from council to create new billboards in these areas. And I'm wondering what the genesis of that was in this proposed ZTA.
Yeah, great question. The genesis of that was a recognition that there is a need for affordable housing in the city. And the link is there for the affordable housing piece, and that is the incentive, and is somewhat limited to the intersection of arterial streets, and that was the genesis of that.
Okay. On page 7 of, which is part of the resolutions, item G, little I, page 7, G, little I, talking about additional findings that the proposal represents an exceptional design. This is a conversation we've had, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 50 times regarding what is truly exceptional. How do you propose to define that when someone tries to claim that option in the code?
Yeah, good question. So I did recommend that we do strike this section from the ordinance. It was modeled on what is in the Sunset Specific Plan, and in conversation with the city attorney.
Oh dear, Brian, you're going underwater.
We discussed and realized that. Okay.
Brian,
back.
You start over because you went for a deep sea dive.
Oh no.
Get your snorkel out.
Okay. Hopefully I'm back here. So we would like to okay. We do recommend that actually that section we would strike that section. This was modeled on what is in the Sunset Specific Plan, but after conversation with the city attorney, we realized that it is a complicated section and most of the provisions are fairly buttoned up here, and we feel like it's not necessary in this circumstance, and it is complicated.
So are you proposing striking entire subparagraph G?
Correct.
Okay. Then let's move on to H. This is about the temporary offsite signage. A site that has an approved project pursuant to the subsection, yada, yada, when approved by art construction fencing, would have, temporary signage, which would have revenue sharing, et cetera, et cetera. But there is no, what would guide what that looked like, the size, the limits, the lighting, all of the, what is that?
Yeah, that would be subject to the size and height limitations of the section.
Of the full sign? You could have a temporary sign the same size as the full sign?
As proposed, yes.
Okay.
And I would point out the operative portion is to encourage timely construction. We've heard, various instances of construction schedules that do drag on, and this was intended to provide an incentive to, again, create a timely construction schedule.
And are there any components here that if they get the sign but not the timely construction, what happens?
That's where we would have to make those findings in the development agreement and specify those terms.
Would that be important to include that in the guidelines of this DTA?
It could be helpful. I imagine it would be a monetary incentive that the revenue sharing portion would escalate. There's, I think, an analogous projects are, in emergency construction situations where, timely delivery of a piece of infrastructure is tied with incentives. So I think that was the idea and the spirit of this subsection.
Okay, let's go back up the page to item F, sub item 4. I think we have a dangling something. The sentence reads, the billboard does remove the appearance of the site as defined by the primary use.
Yes, we'd like to include the word not in there.
Does not.
Not.
Oh, not remove. Does not remove the appearance of the site. I think we still got a problem.
Does not remove the appearance of the site as defined by its primary use. And I think there is precedent. I copied this from somewhere else in our code.
How do you remove the appearance of a site?
I think that would be by having a billboard be an overwhelming feature that dominates the visual appearance of the site, either obscuring entrances, windows, things of that nature.
Perhaps that could be tightened up a little bit. Okay. 7(2) little I. Okay. We'll leave it from there. And one last question, sorry. I may have missed it, but is there any place in this ZTA that expressly prohibits digital signage?
There is. So at the subsection heading G says billboards. This section governs non-digital billboards located in areas of West Hollywood, except the Sunset Specific Plan area.
Subsection G. Oh, just the main header.
Correct.
But it says it governs non-digital billboards, but it doesn't say thou shalt not have a digital billboard.
I would need to check on this. I believe the definition of billboard does not include digital. And if it is not the case, we will certainly button that up.
Okay.
I think there's also a list of prohibited signs.
I-
Brian, you probably want to look there. I'm pulling up the code too.
I would appreciate that clarification, and we can go to public comment and wait, and you can get back to us. Commissioner Vinson?
I have a follow-up question on the temporary signage. So can you elaborate on how that incentivizes them for construction to not drag on?
If it's tied to a revenue sharing and that revenue share escalates for any amount of time that they exceed their construction timeline, that's how it could be construed as an incentive for timely construction.
Okay.
That would have to be a punitive escalation.
Correct.
Because I've been on a job site where the client, had temporary signage outside on the boarded up plywood, and they were making so much revenue off of that they postponed us finishing construction for 3 months because they were making more money off of the sign than to actually have us finish construction and move in. So I just wanted clarification on that.
I think that's a very good point, and perhaps, should it be addressed in how these DAs, some guidelines for the DAs, but for further comment. Did I see Vice Chair Jones? Did you have a question?
I do. It's just a point of clarification as regards item F. What is the difference, and I should probably know this by now, but what is the difference between a digital billboard and a video sign?
So the video sign provisions, these exist in the code already. And we crafted a specific definition in the Sunset Specific Plan to govern how digital billboards operate, and not in reference to the large scale video screen, which, I think from probably the perspective of your average person are the same thing.
Right. Well, I work in advertising and I don't know the difference. So I guess I was just curious about how those are differentiated technically, because to Chair Hoopengarner's point, governing non-digital billboards outside of the Sunset Specific Plan, is different than forbidding digital billboards outside of the Sunset Specific Plan. So I don't want to split hairs, but I want to make sure that I'm clear on the terminology.
Commissioner Lombardi, did I see a question?
Yeah, I might reserve a couple of questions in case there's public comment, but I do have a few quick questions. First one, can you just clarify the number of billboards? I feel like I heard 67, but I saw 76 on the map. And then are 76 billboards shown on that map, or if not, can you explain where they may be?
Yeah, it is 76 billboards. There is a lot of overlap because you can have a two-sided billboard, and each face is considered as one of those billboards. And so, and they do tend to be concentrated. And so without zooming too far into the map, that's why I think if you were to try to just count and eyeball it, it doesn't appear to be 76.
Okay. Might be a little bit confusing for people that are trying to understand impact, where these all are, or if something's missing. So if there's any way we could clarify that, I think that would be helpful. I also have a question regarding billboards that are on Robertson and Melrose. So those will remain non-conforming, but I also heard that there could be improvements through administrative approval, but you're trying to discourage billboards there. So can you just maybe help me understand the objective?
To clarify,
process?
yeah, the minor project category would not be allowed for the billboards on Melrose and Robertson, and therefore they do and would exist in a legally non-conforming state. The subsection does say structural improvements for billboards along arterial streets, and Melrose and Robertson are not arterial streets.
Okay. So one would not be able to improve those billboards because they're non-conforming?
Correct.
Okay. Something else, so in the report, there was note about outreach to stakeholders. Can you explain who those people were and when that was conducted?
Yeah, so this item has been at the City Council on multiple occasions. And so that has been, noticed and agendized, and there was comment during those meetings. We have regular communication with the Chamber of Commerce and their billboard subcommittee, which they help us bring those stakeholders into place, and have on multiple occasions reached out to them, including most recently last week.
Okay, so this has been going on since 2018?
2018, correct.
Okay. One question I have on the resolution, page 5 of 8. So can you just explain replacement billboards may be permitted with a sign area that exceeds existing billboard size by up to 33%? Why are we allowing for that, or what's the logic behind allowing for increased signage area?
To provide an incentive to address the negative land use outcomes.
Okay, so it's really for incentive purposes to make improvements on these billboards.
And the properties themselves, yes.
Those are my questions for now.
Okay, any other questions? Commissioner Dutta.
Thank you. So I did have some questions that were similarly in regards to Melrose and Robertson and the minor projects not being applicable to those two streets. Do we know if there are any specific issues with the structures as they exist right now? I'm just thinking, would the thought be, say there is a need for a structural improvement, what would we advise that property owner to do, or would they in theory have to remove that billboard at that point?
Yeah, and there is incentive in the ordinance as proposed to transfer that, and actually those transfer at a higher rate, meaning every square foot that's transferred from the ones that remain legally non-conforming could result in 3 additional square feet in their new site. And so those are specifically given an additional incentive to provide them, again, that incentive to move those billboards as they exist in a legally non-conforming state.
Okay, and then just to follow up on that, let's say I owned a billboard on Melrose or Robertson, how would I be involved with that transfer, or know where that transfer would go, or what facilitation would there be to assist with knowing where I could move my billboard, or if there is even a location at that moment that would be applicable, or how that would work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a transaction between private parties, and the city could help facilitate that, and it would be recorded in the development agreement, and they'd have to show proof of the demolition of that billboard at some point during that. But again, that's a transaction between private parties.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'm going to add 2 more that I missed. I see that the sizes that are proposed on these billboards are up to considerably larger than those currently allowed on the Sunset Strip. Is there a rationale for that?
Up on the Sunset Strip, a single sign can actually be 1,200 square feet. So this matches that. Digital signs are benchmarked at 1,000 and 1,500 per site. For new billboards, this would actually cap And there's no cap on an individual site on the Sunset Strip. This caps an individual site at 1,800 square feet. So they are somewhat analogous. 1,200 square feet is an industry standard billboard size.
Okay. This is, I guess, maybe partially a question for legal. In item G.2.A.2i at the bottom of page 7, for the minor projects, you're talking about an administrative approval for up to a 5% increase in height. And that would mean that there would be no public notice. And I'm wondering what potential problems that might be. I can see, I've lived very near to the bulk of these billboards at the La Cienega intersection. I could see 5% height taking out someone's view. And if there's no public process, what are the implications?
And to clarify, that would be up to the height limit of the zone district. That would not be allowed to exceed that height unless prescribed within this ordinance.
But if I live in a condo, let's say on Alta Loma, and that billboard goes up 5%, and that 5% takes out my entire view to the east, and there's been no public process, and that's been approved administratively, what kind of legal jeopardy, what kind of, I mean.
Wouldn't views not being protected apply in this situation? I mean, views aren't legally protected in any circumstances, I understood it.
But
whether it's a building or a billboard.
Still subject to the public process.
Well, there is a posting requirement for administrative permits. So it looks like the site will be posted before a staff level approval is made. So there is, and there is a level of notice appropriate for an administrative permit. It's not the same as a planning commission hearing and notice going, being mailed to 500 feet neighbors, but the site will be posted.
So it would require that person driving down that street around a corner, maybe in a place that they don't normally travel in order to see the posting. There would be no mailing within 500 feet. For administrative.
That's correct. If it's for an administrative permit, the site is posted.
Okay. All right. If there's no other questions, then let's move on to public comment. If there's any public, you would have 3 minutes to comment on this item. David?
Thank you, Chair. I received no public comment forms for this item. I see a couple people on the line. If you would like to speak on this item, just hit *9 for me really quick from your telephone, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. I do have one. It's from last 4 digits 3143. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes to speak. Please provide your name and city of residence.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, sir.
This is Adam Darvish. I'm a resident. I can't tell you how impressed I am with your discussions back and forth about public posting and informing the public and residents for projects that are going on. I think some of you have heard me talk at City Council on Public Safety and Transportation Commission about this topic. And, to us residents, what you're reading, what the code and requirement is that's just a minimum to post something around the corner in a hidden area. That doesn't meet the needs of the residents to know. And I can tell you, as I got involved before I even got killed by, kind of a mixed use project that was approved through the city for a hotel to have events on top of the roof where a driver from out of town drove into my house, not knowing the street, and all that went wrong with it. When I backtracked, I found out that there was really no guideline for that hotel to limit traffic to come to my street at 2 in the morning when the bar was closed. Although they have a sign that's barely visible at the valet directing the drivers not to make a right and make a left into Sunset, that didn't meet the needs. So again, I want to commend you for the discussion today and discussions that I heard last time. listened in, and you all really care about informing the residents and making the decision kind of thoughtfully and by informing and getting feedback from residents. And I can tell you that needs to be improved, as I got involved about a year ago in this process. So thank you so much for spending the time and questioning each other, and that's really healthy, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Chair, that looks like that is our last public speaker for this item. Oh, you're muted, Chair.
Sorry.
Thank
Thank you. With that, let's move into deliberations and discussion. Who would like to go first? Vice Chair Jones?
Thank you. So I have some kind of broad stroke comments about this, and some of them I think relate to kind of the intent of this kind of directive from City Council. As it's been explained to me, as it stands right now, there's no legal mechanism by which someone who has a billboard that is legally non-conforming but is in disrepair, or their building is in disrepair, there's not really any way for them to do anything about it because of the fact that it is non-conforming. So I applaud staff for the amount of detail that went into this, but I have some concerns about unintended consequences, which I know this was meant to rectify. I think what I don't want is for this to encourage, this is going to be precedential in a lot of ways. Like, I think that this is going to open up opportunities for people to have billboards in places where they haven't been before. And I'm not like anti-billboard, so to speak. But I do think that there should be protections in place, whereby applicants who want to, move a billboard to another place, or whether that's, off of Sunset to another location, or to improve the property, that, we don't get into this situation where the values of new buildings are being driven up significantly because of advertising revenue. I also have real questions, not to put anybody on blast, but about who this benefits. I mean, I would love to see a list of the, names and locations, like specific locations, like off the map, of the people or entities who own these billboards, and, really who this is going to benefit in the end, just in the spirit of transparency and disclosure. I don't know if this would even be legal, but something that I wanted to surface in this conversation was about, if there's going to be a proposed agreement, that the agreement between the media company, whether that's Outfront or Clear Channel or whomever, and the owner of the building, be made a public document. And I don't know how that works in terms of the DA, but so, we understand what we're, like, what the billboard is worth, and how much people are actually making from these. And again, not because there's anything wrong with making money, but just so that we're clear on the kind of the public benefit part of this. This may also already be a part of the DA process. I am not kind of intimately acquainted or deeply knowledgeable about it, so maybe that's already part, but I did want to service this. I know that especially along Santa Monica Boulevard, there are parts where we have made a real effort to regrow canopy trees there. And I would just, really I would hope that we could make some kind of a requirement that, trees would not be removed for the purpose of billboard advertising. That's I think, a city value, and I hope that they would not be. Let's see, my notes are kind of all over the place here. And also just a note that I would, if we can condition it, or if this could be added, that I don't, under no circumstances should there be billboards that encroach on the public right of way. I know that there are some instances on things pending on Sunset where this has come into question. I'm not comfortable with that along the other arterial streets in the city. So I think that's everything I have to say. I just, in some ways, think that this is a little bit of a slippery slope, and I want to be very careful about how we, make recommendations moving it forward to council about the mechanisms by which billboard owners have a way to improve properties or improve billboards, whichever is, or maybe they are, blighted in both cases, in some instances. But I just want to be really careful about how we move it forward so that, I'm trying to get ahead of any unintended consequences this might bring up. So those are my comments, and I apologize if they're a little all over the place, but I think from a 30,000 feet level, that's what I wanted to kind of have a discussion with about the group today. So thank you.
Thank you. Next. Any other discussion? Commissioner Lombardi?
Thank you. First of all, Vice Chair Jones, I completely agree with the comments that you just said, and I was thinking about some of these as well. I really think transparency is important. I think it would be great if we could get a list of, who would be benefiting from some of this and what those discussions were. I guess I also kind of want to emphasize that I think good design is really important for our city. And I think that's a lens that we need to look at when these things are being reviewed. And I feel like there are some holes in the document right now, and it's something that we can really tidy and button up. So my understanding is that this was a directive that came from City Council. They're asking us to put something together, and I think we should put together the best possible document that we can, make it easy for them, make sure it includes everything that we feel it needs to include. And through our questions, we flagged several items that need to be picked up. And I guess to that list, I'd also like to note that there were some clarifications about, programmatically how the sign works. One open item is lighting. We have lighting requirements on Sunset Boulevard, but in our municipal code, we don't have signage lighting requirements currently. So I think that's something that needs to be added into this document as well, that's not currently there. And we could talk about that more, but at a high level, I think that is a minimum that needs to be there. A lot of these signs are in different areas of the city, and some are very close to residential zones. And making sure that we're really prescriptive of what's allowed, I think, is important. Likewise, there seems to be some openness in terms of the height of the billboards. That definitely concerns me. So I feel like we need to kind of revisit that portion and make sure that it's clear. Just to kind of put it out there, I don't know if any billboards should really be any taller than they currently are if they're in position, given that they were non-conforming. So that's also an item of concern that I have. I probably have a few more. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around. I'll let you know if any more come up, but those are my key comments right there. I think really the design of the billboards needs to be addressed, and I just don't think right now in this form that we currently have in the zone text amendment, it's accounting for those factors as well. And I think that could open up a lot of different directions and where this could go, and it could cause some issues down the road.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Lombardi. Any other discussion, comments? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you so much, Chair. Well, first, I just wanted to say that I'm glad that we're creating a uniform policy that's going to aid in getting outdated and underutilized billboards revitalized, just to improve our visual environment. And I really wanted to commend staff for thinking creatively about how this project can produce more affordable units in an underutilized income category, as well as encourage new projects. That sort of innovative thinking is what sets West Hollywood apart. I do have some concerns, though, about the lack of specificity regarding visual comfort for the video screens. We have specific do's and don'ts in the Sunset Boulevard offsite signage policy that we don't have here. And that's of particular concern because some of these video screens will be in our glowways, which according to our Santa Monica master plan will be on the east side of West Hollywood. And those glowways will also have the laser archways. And that just seems like a lot of light in an area that has so much traffic congestion. So I'd like to see some specifics on visual comfort and contrast. as well as illuminance. And I spoke to staff regarding public benefit and why these projects do not include the same public and arts programming contribution as the billboards on Sunset. And the feeling was that for the new projects that are a result of the additional 5% of the base unit count for the households not to exceed 180% of the area median income, that adding the public arts contribution might be a barrier, which we should not put additional barriers to affordable housing. But for the video screens, it just seems like a missed opportunity to not have a public and arts programming contribution, even if the contribution is slightly less than that from the digital signage on Sunset. That's why I was asking about the development agreement, because on Sunset, the development agreement does include that. So it just seems like a missed opportunity to not include that even if we excluded the new projects that are a result of affordable housing. So those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone?
Chair Gardner, can I interject? So it sounds like we're getting some really good feedback from the commission. And so I think staff wants to recommend we continue this item to a date uncertain after we capture all the comments and do a little bit more homework on this item. So I just wanted to put forth that recommendation.
Thank you, Robin. I would concur wholeheartedly. I think we've got, you've gotten some very good feedback and we're not done yet. I think it's a little raw, not quite fully baked yet. So, okay. Other comments and discussions? If not, then I will throw in my 36 cents. I would concur with my colleagues wholeheartedly. I'd like to take this back to sort of the beginning. And in the beginning, there were no billboards on the boulevards. And I mean that in the sense that from the very beginning, we agreed as a city that the billboards belonged on Sunset Boulevard, that the only ones that were allowed in the other arterials were existing. And we've never, to my knowledge, allowed a new billboard on Santa Monica and in any of these other places. And there was a reason for that. And the reason I brought up my question at the beginning was the fact that at no point during council's directive did they say anything about new billboards. And I think we need to think about that in terms of the impact on Sunset Boulevard, in terms of all of the work we're doing there. And the digitals, and we start increasing competition in other parts. This is way out of, way above my pay grade in terms of, the valuation and all of that. But I think it needs to be specifically addressed. And related to that, I would concur with Commissioner Jones, and I would very much like to see that list. And I think, yes, Brian, you might have gotten verbally dyslexic and said 67 instead of 76. But whatever it is, whatever the number is, I too would very much like to see the list of locations, ownership, etc. Age of the billboard would be useful. And whether or not the billboard is on a historical resource, would it be important to know which of these would be impacted by that component versus some other component. I understand the concept behind adding billboards as an incentive for affordable housing, but I think that needs to be thought through as part of our housing element in a much more comprehensive manner. Instead of breaking this off into bits and pieces again, I think it really should be part of the overall discussion about our housing element. Yes, it impacts this code, obviously, but it's another little piece that, to my knowledge, has never been discussed in the housing element. So may I finish, Mr. Kehoe, before we move on? I just want to kind of get through my thought process here. And it really was never our intention that there would be more billboards on the boulevards outside Sunset Boulevard. In addition, I would very much like to actually read the study that was commissioned and is part of this. So I'd like the list and the study. I'd have to look exactly where my notes were, but I think you discussed in here about, you know, each of these project types, I'm on page 2, are associated with positive land use outcomes, such as upgrades to existing buildings, increased affordable housing. You know, you're talking about adding all of these things, you know, in exchange for moving, et cetera. And to Commissioner Jones' point, not cutting down the trees is a good point, but what about planting more trees? You want a bigger billboard, more? Do we, you know, we want to encourage more trees, not necessarily blocking the billboard, et cetera, but there's a lot, you know, when we talk about public benefit, and this is back to the development agreement, the public development agreement shouldn't always just be about cash, which goes into a kitty at the city hall. It should be a true benefit to the public. And that benefit should accrue to the whole public in the form of things that they can see and touch and feel. And so to me, that there should be a larger thought about that. I think, again, this is not fully baked and needs some additional thought in a number of elements. And back to Commissioner Jones' point about unintended consequences, I think there's a lot of places where some of this could go sideways very easily. And item F, I'd like a large conversation around that digital, because we're back to substantively changing Santa Monica Boulevard. The minute we start having flashing lights and digital media on Santa Monica Boulevard, La Cienega, et cetera, we've substantively changed what my understanding was as part of the general plan and everything we've ever done, that the digital was going to be on Sunset. And so I may be incorrect about that, but if there's no intent for digital on these other billboards off Sunset, then I think we need to be explicit about that. And Director Kehoe, you had something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of history. You were talking about whether or not this would be the first time we've allowed more billboards on Santa Monica Boulevard or off of Sunset. So there was a period of time in which the redevelopment area, which was essentially Fairfax East, we had a redevelopment district in that area. And so we had a set provision in our zoning ordinance that allowed people to upgrade their buildings and move billboards around and try to incentivize people to do things with their billboards. And that had a sunset clause of, I don't know, 2005 or something like that. And so I think we might have gotten one change to billboards out of that. And then also the city, as part of its redevelopment efforts, obviously are allowed to be installed at the Gateway Project, a digital sign. So that was through a development agreement for that project. And then the city also owns the Spalding parking lot, and the city erected a billboard on Santa Monica and Spalding. So there have been a couple of cases in which there have been changes to billboards off of Sunset, just to make sure to let people know that there's a little bit of history behind thinking about it outside of Sunset.
Thank you. With that, thank you, Robin, for your suggestion that this be pulled and brought back to us. That would have been my motion. So I think if there's no objections and if there's no further discussion, Commissioner Caballero.
I had a good conversation with Brian Eck yesterday about, and building on Commissioner Lombardi's comments about design, that this is very much not what we're proposing on Sunset Boulevard. And in trying to define design, like we can do improvements to a pole, and then I'm starting thinking of Lorcan's paperclip on Sunset Boulevard. Is that the maximum sort of design alteration that you can do? Or can we actually push it further, you know, so that they are more like urban art projects? So getting back to that question of like, what defines design and what is acceptable in a low-income housing project, if they start integrating the billboard into the building, you know, how do we sort that? What's acceptable and what's not acceptable? I think it would be really good to sort of, you know, kind of try to define how this program is very different than the Sunset program.
Mm-hmm. I would concur.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, then we will leave this in staff's very capable hands. I guess we'll, legal, do we need to have an official motion? Staff has suggested that, are you effectively sort of pulling the item? I don't know how this would work.
I think a motion to continue it to a date uncertain would be appropriate, and then staff can bring back a revised ordinance.
Then so
I'll
moved.
move. I'll second.
Okay, all right. David, I'll move. Vice Chair Jones is seconded to move this to a date uncertain for more bells and whistles and frosting. And with that, we will move on.
Chair?
Oh, excuse me, yes. Oh, we need a vote, duh.
Yes, thank you.
Letter
Commissioner Vincent,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Lombardi,
Yes.
Commissioner Dutta.
Yes.
Commissioner Carvalero,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jones,
Yes.
Chair Hoopengarner,
Yes.
and the motion carries. This is continued to a date uncertain, at which time all legal noticing will be redone.
Thank you, David, and thank you for keeping me on the straight and narrow. Item 12, new business, there is none. Item 13, unfinished business, there is none. Item 14, excluded consent calendar, there is none. Item 15, items from staff. Item A, the planning manager's update. Robin, you're in the hot seat.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll just give a brief update of items to come for the rest of this month. For July 15th, we'll have subcommittee appointments through June 30th, 2022. And then one project at 8760 North Shoreham Drive. It's an 11-unit apartment building. And then we'll have the special meeting scheduled for July 29th to talk about the housing element. Would you like any updates on any of the other subcommittee meetings?
Why don't we hit that when we get to subcommittee management? And so then let's move on to item 16, public comment.
Thank you, Chair. I have not received any public comments for this item, but I do show a few people on the line. If you'd like to speak, please hit *9 for me at this time. That'll let me know you'd like to speak. You will have 3 minutes to speak on anything general off the agenda. And Chair, it looks like it's all clear.
We're going to interpret that to be that we're doing such a brilliant job that the public has nothing further to add. Okay, moving on. Item 17, items from commissioners. Item A, commissioner comments. Vice Chair Jones.
Yes, thank you. I just do want to repeat, I think I said this at the last meeting of the Sunset Arts and Advertising Subcommittee, as well as at our last planning meeting, but I will not be in attendance at next week's SASE meeting. I will be out of town on vacation. So I just want to say that for the record again. Thank you.
And okay, thank you. Any Commissioner Dutta?
Similarly, I will not be at the next Planning Commission meeting on July 15th, as well as the Long Range Planning Subcommittee meeting that same day.
Very good, thank you. And any other commissioner comments? So subcommittee management, Robin, we know that we've got SASE next week, which will be Commissioner Lombardi and myself serving. And that will be
8590 Sunset Boulevard. Mm-hmm.
And then design review?
Nothing scheduled for July.
Okay.
And the same with long range subcommittee. Nothing scheduled for July.
Well, Commissioner Dutta, you're off the hook on that one. Okay, excellent. I would like actually at this moment to ask legal a brief question about subcommittee and the Brown Act. We know that those of us who serve on subcommittees are basically not allowed to speak to each other about items because 2 people out of 3 speaking would be quorum and therefore we can't speak. If a commissioner will not be in attendance at a subcommittee and therefore there's only 2 people that will be in attendance, so I don't know, one's a quorum, I don't know how that works, I guess it's still 2. Are either of those 2 that are serving allowed to speak to the person who's not going to be in attendance because they're not going to be in attendance? Just out of curiosity.
Guess it depends. Do you want to talk about the substance of the proposal?
Correct. So let's say Long Range is having a discussion about whether or not there should be an ice cream parlor on every street corner in the city of West Hollywood. But Chair Jones is going to be in Japan, bless her heart. And Commissioner Vinson wants to talk to Chair Jones about her brilliant ideas about having an ice cream parlor on every street corner in the city of West Hollywood before she heads to the Friendly Skies. Since Commissioner Jones is not going to be there, is that conversation prohibited by the Brown Act?
So I would recommend not doing that, and here's why. We're worried about quorums when we're talking about the Brown Act. And so the first body is the 7 of you. And the reason you have a subcommittee is that it's less than a quorum that meets to discuss these standing items. And then you report back and advise your larger body. But the smaller subcommittee is a body as well. And so 2 out of 3 of you would be a quorum of that body. And so we're really getting into the weeds of the Brown Act. But I would advise against it. I think for purposes of a standing subcommittee and what's within your subject matter jurisdiction, you should keep those conversations to the meeting room, or in this case, the Zoom room, until we get back in public.
And I was aware of that rule for if all 3 were going to be at the meeting. My question was solely if one of those people was not going to be in attendance and was not going to be discussing it in public in front of everybody, was that rule still in place? But that's fine.
It's still the subject matter jurisdiction of the whole body, and it could come back another time. So I would advise against it.
I was just curious because it came up and I was like, wow, that's a really good question. So I wanted to put it out there and ask you. Thank you. With that, if there's no further items from Commissioner or other subcommittee business, we will adjourn this meeting of the Planning Commission to the regular scheduled meeting on Thursday, July 15th, 2021, beginning at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom, once again, until further notice. With that, welcome to July, everybody, and have a good week. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Happy long weekend. Bye, everyone.